everyone, welcome back. So this video almost did not get filmed today because I went to go switch laundry over to the dryer and dryer's broken. So I had to hang everything up to dry, and then come to find out child had absolutely no pants for school this week. So an emergency run to the laundromat was made, whereupon I figured out I'd forgot to pack any laundry detergent or softener. So after buying the severely overpriced laundry detergent and softener, I ended up spending something like $10 for one load of laundry to make sure my child can go to school tomorrow. Mommy life. That being said, let's get into why you're here, and that is today's book review. Today's story is both an MC romance and a dark romance. Let's get into the story, which is It Ain't Me, Babe by Tilly Cole. Now we're going to take a minute and really kind of appreciate this cover art here because it is very fitting for this story. It is both eerie and beautiful in a very creepy kind of way, but it also very fitting for the story because it's very much how the story is. So, pardon me. Trigger warnings for the story are many. We're going to start off with the least triggering, going up to the most triggering. So we have references to the possibility of cheating. It's kind of like gray area, but it's in there. Obviously, it's an MC dark romance, so there's going to be violence, there's going to be shootouts, there's going to be people who die. And then moving into the more disturbing, we have brainwashing, we have mental, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, not only of adults, but of children as well. We have kidnapping. We have, what else was the other one? PTSD, and I think that's most of the big ones. So that being said, let's get into the story. This is the story of Salome. She never had a surname in the story, it's just Salome. And then River, Styx, Nash. Now, Salome and River meet when they are still children. River has gone with his father and his father's club brother to go dispose of a body, where being 11 years old, he's not actually there to do that, you know. I think his father was a single dad. So he was expected to wait in the car, which he did not do, as any 11-year-old does. He wandered off. And he came to a metal fence out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of this forest. And there's a little girl on the other side, roughly about the age of 8. And she is just sitting there crying brokenly. And when he manages to get her attention and she looks up, he is struck by how beautiful she is, which, you know, again, he's 11, she's 8. And he describes her as having these big ice blue eyes like a wolf. And throughout the rest of the story, he refers to her as his wolf girl. But at first, he's trying to get her to talk to him. He is signing frantically. It's not that he can't talk in general, but he has a very severe stutter. And he can actually only physically talk to 2 people. He can only physically talk to his father and his best friend. Whenever he tries to talk to anybody else, he describes the feeling as though there's like a boa constrictor around his neck. And whenever he tries to talk, it's squeezing tighter and tighter. So he physically cannot talk to anybody. So he's trying to sign, hoping she knows sign language. Obviously, she does not. And he does manage to speak to her to try and get any information from her he can. You know, who are you? What is this place? And he's completely floored that he's able to talk to her because she's now only the 3rd person in his entire life he can talk to. And that's a big thing for him. And at first she doesn't say anything to him, but then she finally says, "I am sin." And there isn't much else said between them, although they do share a kiss before they are separated and they each basically go back to their own lives. So it's one of those openings where in the moment it seems very mysterious, and it is very mysterious. And then the reasons for certain situations, such as like the reasons to why they were both there at that time, will come into play later. And it's very disturbing. But so that's how Salome and River meet. Fast forward a few years, River is now the president of the Hades Hangmen MC. His road name is now Styx, so I will be referring to him as Styx from now on. And the next chapter is from Salome's perspective. It is her wedding day. She is expected to marry the prophet of the cult that she has been brought up into. He is a man who is in his 70s, and she is, I believe, 22, 23. So I'm sure you can all tell by now this is not something she's greatly looking forward to. She wanders off hoping to find her older sister Bella. Her sister's been missing for a few days. She hasn't been able to find her. And then finally, one of her other sisters, she has two biological sisters, and then another girl that the four of them are sisters in another way. But one of them has managed to find where Bella is, and they take her to her. Bella has basically been beaten. She is naked. She is freezing cold. It is very clear that she's in her last minutes, her last moments of life. And as she is in her last moments, she basically tells Salome, and I think she's really telling all three of them to get away. You need to leave. Get away from here, basically. And Salome is the only one that really seems to take this to heart and leaves. Now, I don't remember if the other two wanted to go. Well, one of them I know did not want to go, but the other one I just don't remember if she just didn't want to go or if she just didn't feel that it would be possible. Because keep in mind, this entire community is enclosed by this huge metal gate. Salome manages to find where the fence is. She digs a hole under the fence, just barely big enough for her to get under. And she manages to very severely sprain her ankle. Because the hole was so shallow, the bottoms of the fence basically raked down like her body and caused some pretty deep gashes. So you already know that it's bad enough that she wants to get away, that she's willing to do physical damage to her body. So she does manage to get away, and she eventually ends up in the parking lot of the Hades Hangmen MC compound. There she is found by Styx and a lady of the club, and at first they thought she was dead. They were getting ready to take her body somewhere away, and then she moved or she made a little sound or something, and they realized she's still alive. And Styx is kind of drawn to her. He's not entirely sure why. He thinks she bears a resemblance to the little girl that he'd found all those years ago, but he's not entirely sure that it's her. But he's been so fixated on this girl that on the chance that she is her, he's like, yeah, no, we're not going to let anything happen to her. She wakes up, and eventually it does come out that she is in fact the little girl that he met all those years ago. Neither of them had forgotten about each other. They had each thought about each other often and basically pined for each other for all these years. I think it's like 14 or 15 years or something. And Styx is on the fence as to whether or not the MC is a good place for her or not. It is very clear she has not been brought up in modern society. She doesn't have any idea what a cartoon is. When they told her that it was a motorcycle club, she had no idea what a motorcycle was. She knew what a car was, but not a motorcycle. And it's very clear that she's lived in a very, in some ways, sheltered life. Very clearly not sheltered in others, but in some ways, Yes. It's very clear she's been brought up in a very fundamentalist religious community, and she really doesn't want to talk about where she came from. And eventually when they get into the discussion about where she came from and what happened to her, it becomes very clear why she didn't want to talk about it. The community she lived in is a religious cult where men marry multiple wives. But even that's not necessarily like a make or break it deal, because there are some people who can be in polygamous or polyamorous relationships, and it's okay. It's all about, whether it's consenting adults and, same mindset, right? Well, that's very clearly not the case here. Men will have multiple wives, and the man she was going to be married to was a man who was in his 70s, which I think I already mentioned. But Salome, her 2 biological sisters, and the 4th sister were all girls that were basically shunned by the community. They were disowned by their own families, and they were shunned for no other reason than the fact that they are physically very extremely beautiful women. In their community, it is basically believed that if a young girl or woman is the level of beautiful that they are described as being, the only way that could be possible would be if they were spawned by the devil, because the devil wanted to tempt men away from the faith, basically. And I'm like, at first you're like, well, wait, what? Like, what? And then they describe what happens to a woman on her when it comes time for her awakening. For Salome, this happened at the age of 8, which does seem to be more of the norm. For another character later in the series, this happened at the age of 6. But for Salome, it happened at the age of 8. And that is when they are expected to take part in what is called a Lord's sharing. And this is where the women are expected to help men to commune with God, I guess, for lack of a better terminology, through sex. And because they are women, descendants of Eve, who is responsible for first sin, they are not permitted to enjoy it. So at the age of 8, she is brought into this large room where, for lack of a better term, there is something of a forced orgy going on. She is placed into position after being stripped naked by another woman, put into place, and there is something put between her legs to prevent her from closing them. And I'm going to end it there because I think it's very clear where this is going. So basically, as far as I can tell, these 4 young girls were shunned by their community because of their beauty, because sick, twisted men blamed them for the fact that they are sick and are attracted to children. So it's when I said this one's triggering and dark, I wasn't lying. So clearly, anyone who has children, anyone who's been abused in any way, do not read this story. It will set you off. So after finding out about all of the abuses that Salome has gone through, Styx, understandably, and I think to his credit, starts to question whether or not he is the right man for her, if this is the right place for her. He doesn't want to put her in a position where she feels that she has to do certain things. However, because of this constant, I don't know if I'm good for her, no, she's mine, this back and forth, it does cause tensions later on, because there is a woman who has kind of been, like, not his girlfriend, but she's been his, like, semi-permanent hookup chick, who she's in love with Styx. So now Salome is here and she's basically discarded. But even she doesn't get mad at Salome about it, because she gets it. She doesn't like it, but she gets it. And then there's another woman that Styx, I don't know if he actually intended to sleep with her or not, but at one point it seemed as though he was going to cheat on Salome, which is kind of weird because they aren't really together yet. It's one of those weird, like, in-between places. But whether he was going to do it or not, he realized he can't, because Salome is the only one he wants. But by that point it's too late. Salome kind of saw something and decided that he was going to do that. And throughout the course of time, there's another man who's developed feelings for Salome. So there's a lot of will they, won't they, can they, can't they. And I would say it seems very much like junior high or high school, except in the way it's written and with the flow of the story, it doesn't come off as immature, in my opinion. It does come out more as two people who are flawed, obviously, and one who is very severely damaged mentally and emotionally. Really finding how they fit. You know, one is very clearly led a very traumatized life and has to figure out what they will and won't do with themselves in life, what they will and won't put up with, what they will and won't accept. Can I accept life on the outside? These people don't seem as evil as what I was told they would be, you know, like a lot of growth on the part of Salome. But then on Styx's side, while, I mean, he may not have had like the stereotypical Norman Rockwell cookie cutter life growing up, he did have a father who cared about him. I mean, and he had support growing up, you know. So he's understandably not sure if he's right for Salome. And then eventually they each get their heads out of their backsides and they realize that, you know, good for each other or not, you know, we're it for each other. And after that, that's it. They're a unit. They're together. That's done, which is good. However, the cult wants her back, and there is an abduction, and the MC rallies all the other chapters to come get her back. There is a huge step on Styx's behalf where he ends up overcoming his inability to speak in front of people, because it's all pertaining to getting Salome back. He still has the very harsh stutter. He will always have that. That will never go away. And I love the fact that the author doesn't like make it miraculously go away like some authors would, because there's nothing wrong with someone who does or doesn't have a stutter. But I'm digressing. We'll get to that in a little bit. And then by the end of the story, the couple is together. They are happy. And there are two more women from the compound. They are, in fact, Salome's sisters, the two remaining sisters that are still alive. So, of course, that leaves foreshadowing for future stories. So, as for Styx as a character, I'm going to start off with Salome, sorry. So, for Salome as a character, I love her so much. She is a very, despite everything she's gone through, and she's gone through a lot very clearly, she's still very caring, very loving, very forgiving. In later stories, this will kind of come up to bite her in the backside, her being so forgiving. But she is very loving. She is very forgiving. She cares about people in general, even people who anyone else would possibly write off, because she is a good person at heart. Even when Styx leaves his long-term hookup chick, the long-time hookup chick isn't mad at her. She goes up to talk to her, and at first you would think she's going to like yell at her, scream at her, but she doesn't. She just says, I understand why he's leaving me for you. And I just wish that you hadn't come here. So it says a lot that the woman who has been left for you isn't mad at you, if that makes sense. And that's part of what made that situation even harder, was because the other woman didn't act like a raving B-word. She was very cool about it, even though she was heartbroken. Pretty much every member of the club develops an affection for Salome. Even the ones that like to poke fun at her and make her uncomfortable, like in a teasing kind of way, they still are protective of her, and none of them really hesitate when they have to go get her back. Pretty much all of the old ladies of the club have taken her under their wing. They basically consider her their pseudo little sister, and they're very protective of her. And they will not hesitate to go to war with the president of the club on her behalf, which is super fun. But even with all this loving, giving, caring nature, there is still a steel to her spine that cannot be denied. I mean, again, she managed to escape the compound. She dug a shallow hole, and she had to put herself through a large amount of physical pain to get under that gate and get away. When she was kidnapped, she very easily could have started to freak the F out. But instead, she kind of kept it together. She knew that the club was coming and that she would get away. And even in the face of a major betrayal, and I mean a major betrayal, she still managed to hope that that person would find happiness in their life. And there's a lot of storylines and side storylines that I have not brought in here, and I'm not going to, because I don't want to completely destroy the story. I have a history of doing that, and I try not to. So she has, but she's just this very caring nature. The only thing that I'd say you could really question on her character development is, how does somebody go through that much trauma, that much pain, that much torture, that much mental and emotional anguish, and still come out as mentally solid as she is, and emotionally solid and caring and loving as she is. But again, it's done in a way where it's pretty realistic. You know, it's not necessarily outside the realm of reality to occur. I think we've all come across stories where someone just does everything so well that it makes no sense. How is it possible for someone to be so good at everything? You know, like Rey from The Force Awakens, not to get into movies, but, you know. But she's a very cool character. I'm not going to say she's my favorite female character, but she's definitely up there. She's probably in my top 10 for sure. As for Styx, barring that incident where he almost cheated on Salome, and I'm going to put it in the cheating character category, because by that point he'd already basically made it clear that he wanted her, you know. Even barring the fact that he left his long-time hookup for Salome, I still found myself cheering for him, because the long-time hookup chick was a hookup chick, and he never told her that it was going to be any different. He's basically been besotted by this girl ever since he was a kid. Multiple people made reference throughout the story that he never shut up about her. You know, he may not have been able to physically talk to people, but with sign language, and he never let it go. It was always about his wolf girl. And then once he had her, once he had her and they were set, he was extremely devoted to her and would stop at nothing to get her back and make sure she was happy. But he also has this huge weight of having to be the president of the motorcycle club. I mean, there's a lot he has to do as a president of a motorcycle club. His father had been the president of the club, so he has a big sense of duty as to having to do right by both the club and his father's legacy of the club. And then after the fact, after Salome has been taken and they have to go get her, he doesn't hesitate to be willing to bring her sisters, because he knows how close she is to them, and he knows how much she struggled with the fact that she left them there. And whenever there was a question in his head about whether or not it was right for him to have Salome there, it first got put in his head by his best friend, who basically said, you know, she's not right to be an old lady. And he was kind of like, okay, well, maybe. But generally speaking, when he really started to heavily question whether it was right for them to be together, it was always after something came up where he realized how much she'd been through. It wasn't about, to me, I mean, I'm sure other people might have different beliefs if they were to go through and read it, but it seemed as though his big worry was about whether or not she could handle the life, whether or not it would break her ultimately, considering everything she'd already been through. He didn't want to be responsible for making her life worse. So I'm going to say this is one of my favorite books that I've ever come across. This is one of the few books I would ever give a 5 stars, and this is a 5 out of 5 stars. If I could give it more than 5 stars, I would. It's very well done. At no time does any of the struggles that happen ever seem unreal. Sometimes you can come across a story where it's trying to be as realistic as possible, and then it just becomes like really kind of crazy. But that's part of what makes this story so heavy and so dark. There's nothing in here where you can look at it and be like, there's no way that could happen in real life. There's absolutely no way that could happen in real life. Every single thing in this story could happen in real life. And that is what makes it so freaky, scary, and creepy, and haunting. Because shit like this happens every single day, believe it or not. But the love that they have for each other is what brought them through. So, again, 5 out of 5 stars, hands down. If any of the subject matters in here are not something that would trigger you, then I would highly recommend trying this book. However, even if you make it through this book, tread extremely lightly before moving on with other stories, because they do get darker. I barely made it past the 3rd book and it almost broke me. So tread extremely lightly if you make it past the 1st one. So I'll see you all at the next review. You have a great day. Take care. See you later. Bye-bye.